And thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. So they were trained spies. They were highly trained in terms of espionage, but also in terms of language and accent and mannerisms. They were supposed to be able to blend right in. And sometime in the 1980s, they arrived in Canada. They arrived as a couple. They had false identities. They had false identities that had been stolen from real Canadians. Apparently, there had been a little boy in the Montreal area in the 1960s whose name had been Donald Heathfield. And sometime in the 1960s, that little child had died in infancy. There had also been a little girl named Tracy Leanne Foley, who had also died in the Montreal area in the 1960s in childhood. Decades later, in the 1980s, these two Russian adults, these two spies, stole those identities from those deceased kids from the 1960s. And under those identities, they started a fake life in Toronto. The couple lived in Toronto through the 80s and into the 90s. In the 90s, as Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley, these fake identities, they had two sons. Their sons were born 4 years apart. After their sons were born in Canada in the 90s, the family moved sometime in the mid to late 90s to France, where the father, Donald Heathfield, went to grad school. He was fluent in French as well as English, as was his wife. The family apparently spoke both French and English at home with their boys. They didn't speak Russian at home with their boys, even though they were from Russia and were native Russian speakers. Their sons apparently had no idea that their parents were Russian at all. When the story of their very unusual family was ultimately told, the boys would ultimately say they had no inkling that their parents were Russian. They had never heard their parents speak Russian. They never heard their parents speak about Russia. They certainly had no idea that their parents were Russian spies. Although their spy life started in Canada, though, ultimately the goal of this spy operation, the reason they were deployed by Russian intelligence in the first place, was not to spy on Canada, but instead to spy ultimately on the United States. All that time in Canada was like training wheels for Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley. That was their time where they got to acclimate to the West, build up their skills at blending in the West, build up their plausible background as a worldly but normal Canadian family. And after Donald Heathfield's stint at grad school in France in the late 90s, they started in Canada, they went to France for him to go to grad school, then they finally did it. They moved to the United States. And Donald Heathfield enrolled in another prestigious grad school program. He enrolled at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And look, we've got a terrible photo of Donald Heathfield at his Harvard graduation from the Kennedy School in the year 2000. The reason that we have this not great photo, this grainy photo taken from very far away of him at that graduation in the year 2000, is because this photo was taken by the FBI. Because the FBI apparently knew as soon as Donald Heathfield and his purportedly Canadian family got to the United States, the FBI apparently knew that they weren't Canadians at all. They were, in fact, Russian spies living under deep cover. Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley had been living for 2 decades in Canada and then in Europe before they ever set foot in the United States to start spying for Russia here. We now know that the FBI was onto them as spies as soon as they got here. So this is the FBI photo of Donald Heathfield at his Harvard graduation in 2000. There are also FBI photos of his wife, Tracy Leanne Foley, at that graduation as well. Ultimately, a decade later, in 2010, when the federal indictment against these spies was unsealed, we would get tons of detail on what this spy couple was assigned to do here in the U.S. by their handlers in Russia. We learned the goals of why they were sent. We learned their specific assignments. We learned how well they did at carrying out those specific assignments from Moscow. We learned how they communicated with their handlers back home in Moscow. We learned their codes, their spy technology. We got all of it in the indictment. This is from the indictment from 2010. Quote, "From in or about the 1990s, up to and including the present, the defendants and others known and unknown unlawfully, willfully, and knowingly would and did act in the United States as agents of a foreign government, specifically the Russian Federation, without prior notification to the Attorney General as required by law. The FBI has conducted a multi-year investigation of a network of United States-based agents of the Foreign Intelligence Organ of the Russian Federation, the SVR. The targets of the FBI's investigation include covert SVR agents who assume false identities and who are living in the U.S. on long-term, deep cover assignments. These Russian secret agents work to hide all connections between themselves and Russia, even as they act at the direction and under the control of the SVR. These secret agents are typically called illegals. The FBI's investigation has revealed that a network of illegals is now living and operating in the U.S. in the service of one primary long-term goal: to become sufficiently Americanized such that they can gather information about the U.S. for Russia and can successfully recruit sources who are in or are able to infiltrate U.S. policymaking circles. In this indictment, Donald T. Field and Tracy Leanne Foley were called the Boston conspirators. It says in the indictment, quote, "The Boston conspirators have received info tasks, directives with respect to information that Moscow Center wanted them to focus on obtaining, including, among other things, U.S. foreign policy. For example, a Boston conspirators internet message from in or about April 2006 set forth the info task for May and June, which was that they should gather information regarding U.S. policy with regard to the use of the internet by terrorists, U.S. policies in Central Asia, problems with U.S. military policy, and the Western estimation of Russian foreign policy." Quote, "A Boston conspirators electronic message to Moscow Center from in or about May 2006 focused on turnover at the head of the CIA and the 2008 U.S. presidential election." So the FBI unsealed this indictment in 2010. And we got all this very specific, like directly quoted information about what these spies had been told by Moscow to do here and what they told Moscow, what they in fact carried out here under Moscow's orders. We also learned all this technical spy movie stuff about their secret communications. This is from the indictment. "To further the aims of the conspiracy, Moscow Center has arranged for the defendants clandestinely to communicate with the Russian Federation. In particular, the conspirators have used the secret communication methods described below: radiograms and steganography." Now, at that point, reading the indictment, I'm, as a total idiot, I'm like, oh, steganography, it must be a dinosaur-related code. You know, like, you go to the Museum of Natural History, there's the Stegosaurus, and like under the, you know, the hoof is, turns out, steganography has nothing to do with dinosaurs. It is an actual spy thing. According to the FBI, quote, "Steganography is the process of secreting data in an image. Moscow Center uses steganographic software that is not commercially available. The software package permits the SVR to clandestinely insert encrypted data in images that are posted on publicly available websites without the data being visible. The encrypted data can then be removed from the image and decrypted, also using software provided by the SVR. Similarly, SVR software can be used to encrypt data and then to clandestinely embed that data in images on publicly available websites." The FBI helpfully later released this photo of online images of flowers to show some of the actual online images that the Russian illegals used to pass messages back and forth with Moscow Center. Messages encrypted in individual pixels in these images of flowers. Crazy, right? In an FBI search of Donald Heath Field and Tracy Leanne Foley's house in Boston in 2006, quote, "Law enforcement agents observed and forensically copied a set of computer disks. These password-protected disks contained a steganography program employed by the SVR and by the illegals." So they're using this super spy movie technique of dead-dropping encrypted messages for their handlers back in Moscow. The messages are inside the pixels of pictures of flowers online. And they use this spy software that encrypts those messages and then can also uncrypt those messages so the messages can be read. And that's how they're passing information back and forth to Moscow. And we know all of this because the FBI is onto it. The FBI knows what they are doing and watched them do it for years. I mean, look at that timeline here. That house search of the Boston townhouse where the FBI grabbed and imaged the disks with the steganography code stuff on it, that was July 2006. That was a full 6 years after they were lurking at Harvard, secretly taking pictures of Donald Heathfield at his graduation ceremony that year. The FBI was watching him and surveilling them and collecting intel on their operations for that whole 6-year period. The FBI, during that time, had also put microphones inside the spy's house. Quote, on or about October 3rd, 2004, law enforcement agents intercepted oral communications taking place inside the Boston townhouse. Tracy Leanne Foley, defendant, was heard saying to Donald Heathfield, defendant, quote, can we attach 2 files containing messages or not? Let's say 4 pictures? They're talking about this steganography code, right? They're talking about transmitting secret messages home to Moscow Center using the picture encryption trick with the Russian software they've got on those password-protected disks. And they apparently had no idea they shouldn't talk out loud about that in their house because the FBI had bugged their house. They had no clue how much the FBI was onto them. And the FBI was apparently onto them for years, down to the smallest detail, completely unbeknownst to these trained spies. The FBI was onto them for the entire time that they were in the United States. So Donald Heathfield comes to this country from France to go to Harvard. He graduates from Harvard in the year 2000. The FBI is there at his graduation. January 23rd, 2001, the FBI gets into a safe deposit box that Heathfield and Foley had opened up in Cambridge, Mass. Quote, inside the Cambridge safe deposit box, officials observed and photographed a series of photographic negatives. The negatives appear to be of Tracy Leanne Foley when she was in her 20s. On all of the negatives of the younger Foley, save one, the name of the company that produced the film on which the negatives were printed had been excised, meaning it had been cut off the negative sheet. But on one negative, quote, the name of the film company remained visible. They missed one. The FBI later published pictures of these negatives that they'd photographed inside the safety deposit box. And you can see from that, see where the red arrow is? On just one of the negatives, there's this blurry little tiny reference. Looks like TACMA. You Google TACMA, even now that means absolutely nothing. But if that is what looks like TACMA, but it's actually in Cyrillic, if it's in the alphabet in which the Russian language is written, then the C in TACMA is actually what we would think of as an S. And so that little single blurry mark that looks to us like TACMA in English and therefore means nothing, in Cyrillic, it's TASMA. And TASMA is, in fact, a manufacturer of Russian film, which means those negatives were printed on Russian film, which means, hey, I think these guys are Russian. And that is probably why they cut that identifying TASMA reference almost all but one, off of all but one of those negatives showing pictures of a younger Tracy Leanne Foley. These pictures that were in that safe deposit box. They forgot to cut the reference off one of the negatives, and with that one reference still there, the FBI caught it. And here's the best part. The FBI got into that safe deposit box and they found that out. They found that one tiny little marginal missed reference on one negative. They found that January 2001. They photographed it. They took that evidence, photographic evidence, right? They put all the negatives back, put everything back as it was, and they left the safe deposit box there. And then they just kept surveilling Heathfield and Foley for years. A full decade later, in 2010, the FBI apparently had reason to go back into that same safe deposit box again. And those negatives, including the incriminating one with the Cyrillic script on it, those negatives are all still there a decade later, because Heathfield and Foley had no idea that their safe deposit box had been spied on by the FBI for a decade. They had no idea the FBI had been onto them for 10 years, for all of those years, going through their safe deposit box, photographing them, miking their house. The FBI had secretly gone inside their house on multiple occasions. They had photographed their notes and letters. They, in fact, had photographed this page from this notebook from Donald Heathfield, which apparently includes his handwritten notes on the 27-digit password he needed to log into that software that allowed him to encrypt his messages in online pictures. They had the picture of the password code. The FBI was that up in their business for that many years, and these trained spies had no clue. By the time of their indictment in 2010, the FBI not only had detailed descriptions of their tradecraft and verbatim instructions that they'd received from Moscow, not only did they have all the details of the means by which they communicated with their handlers, they also had detailed information, critically, including the names of all the people who Donald Heathfield had approached in the United States as part of his spying for Moscow. He was supposedly a guy with a Harvard degree and good language skills who was working at a consultancy in Cambridge. But he was using that as cover to spy for Russia. And it turns out he wasn't just reporting back publicly available information like there's a new CIA director and there's a big election underway. He was getting information out of individuals that he was reporting back to Moscow. Individuals like a person who had worked in Congress as a legislative counsel, an economics professor who had live contacts in Congress and with Washington policymakers. He reported to Moscow that he had established contact with a former high-ranking U.S. government national security official. The FBI knows who that was. They didn't put their name in the indictment, but they watched that contact happen, and they watched it reported up the chain by this spy. Heathfield also appears to have made contact with a U.S. official working on nuclear weapons at a U.S. government research facility. Quote, had conversations with him about research programs on small-yield, high-penetration nuclear warheads authorized by U.S. Congress, i.e. nuclear bunker buster warheads. It's not comforting that an active Russian spy was making contact with and communicating with U.S. officials who were actively involved in nuclear weapons research in the United States, right? That's alarming. It is slightly less alarming when you learn that the FBI was watching them do it every step of the way for years, while the spies had no idea the FBI was onto them. This is the counterintelligence part of the FBI at work. Their job is to counter foreign intelligence operations inside the United States. In the Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley case, you see that work unfolding completely undetected, with this incredible level of intrusive surveillance on these spies over the course of a decade. I mean, this must be incredibly hard to do without being found out, right? It's also unbelievably cinematic. I mean, this case of the Russian illegals, this spy ring, which was uncovered in 2010, it really is what led to the TV series The Americans. In real life, in this case, there was a side plot to Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley, specifically because their sons, who had been born in Toronto in the 90s, those sons apparently had no idea before their parents were arrested in 2010 that their parents had been spies or that they were Russian. That became this dramatic legal battle in Canada when the boys sued the Canadian government to try to get their Canadian citizenship back. Canada was like, we don't care that you were born here. You're Russian. And the boys were like, maybe, but we don't speak Russian and we don't speak Russian and we've never been there. So please, can we be Canadians again? Right. This is the kind of stuff that, for obvious reasons, ends up making good movies and good TV series. But those movies and those TV series are based on real life. I mean, this is a way that governments fight each other. This is a way governments steal information from each other and sabotage each other. This potentially is a way that governments can fall. If you can use clandestine operations like this to get people loyal to a different government into positions of power in your targeted country, you can essentially bring down that country's government, right? That country can fall before your intelligence operation. That's the worst case scenario if operations like this are ever so successful that they reach their highest objectives. The FBI now has a public-facing website about the illegals, about that Russian spy ring. They headline it Operation Ghost Stories because that was the FBI code name for that investigation. They called it Ghost Stories because these spies used the identities of dead people to start building their legends in North America. The FBI says, quote, these deep-cover Russian spies may not have achieved their objective, but they were not idle. They collected information and transmitted it back to Russia. They were actively engaged in what is known in the spy business as spotting and assessing. They identified colleagues, friends, and others who might be vulnerable targets. They were trying to co-opt people they encountered in the academic environment who might one day hold positions of power and influence. The most famous example of this tactic took place in Great Britain in the 1930s, when Soviet intelligence talent spotters were able to recruit Cambridge University students who would later rise to power in the British government and become Soviet operatives during World War II and into the 1950s. Quote, we believe the SVR illegals operating in this country may well have hoped to do the same thing here. The SVR was in it for the long haul. The illegals were content to wait decades to obtain their objective. Counterintelligence division at the FBI pulled the plug on these Russian illegals, including Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley, in 2010. Under that indictment that was unsealed in 2010, all in one day, all across the country, they and all the other illegals were all arrested and sent home in a big, highly publicized spy swap. the lead case agent for Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley at the FBI. The FBI agent who led this covert FBI operation that monitored those two Russian spies for years. All the surveillance that these trained spies were unable to detect. All the intelligence collection from right under their noses, breaking their codes and miking their house and photographing their notes and all the rest of it. That lead agent who ran that intrepid FBI operation against Donald Heathfield and Tracy Leanne Foley was an FBI agent named Peter Strzok. Being the lead agent on Heathfield and Foley was just one of the high-profile, high-stakes espionage cases that Peter Strzok has worked on or led at the FBI. He actually won a medal for his work on that one. But he also worked on other Russian spy rings in the U.S. and Chinese spy rings in the United States. Over more than 20 years at the FBI, he rose to become the senior agent on all espionage cases at the Washington field office at the FBI. Ultimately, he rose from there to become the head of the counterintelligence division for the whole FBI. In that capacity, he ended up involved in the investigation of Hillary Clinton using a personal email address when she was Secretary of State. In that capacity, as head of the counterintelligence division at the FBI, Peter Strzok was also assigned at the very earliest stages to the FBI investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and Russian interest in the Donald Trump presidential campaign. You'll recall that in the spring and early summer of 2016, foreign intelligence agencies and governments started coming across information and intelligence intercepts about unexplained Russian involvement in and support for Trump's presidential campaign. Those foreign intelligence agencies and governments notified the CIA. The CIA, of course, doesn't do work to counter foreign intelligence operations inside the United States. That's the job of the FBI. That's the job that FBI agent Peter Strzok was in charge of for the FBI. The FBI started an investigation into that matter in the summer of 2016. That meant Peter Strzok was in charge of that because of his career. He was very well placed to do that work, right? Intimately familiar with Russian intelligence operations and Russian intelligence efforts inside the United States. In his role as head of the counterintelligence division at the FBI, he was literally the lead person in the entire U.S. government in charge of stopping Russian operations inside the United States. And he had decades of experience in that, and awards and indictments and dramatic international spy swaps to show for it. That work also apparently gave him some feelings about Russia. And we know something about how he felt about Russia and its government and its intelligence operations, in part because reporters and the public have inexplicably been given access to Strzok's personal texts that he wrote to a woman at the FBI with whom he was having an affair. As the FBI investigation into Russian interference started up, it was just starting up in the summer of 2016, and Peter Strzok was working on that investigation. He exchanged texts with Lisa Page at the FBI, apparently while the two of them were each watching TV footage of the Republican National Convention. Now, I'm going to read you one of those texts from Peter Strzok. I'm not going to swear when I read that text, but I want you to know that I'm going to make an obvious allusion to a swear word, just in case you're watching with your kid and you don't want your kid to hear it. Ready? All right, 1, 2, 3. Quote, "F the cheating mother effing Russians. Bastards. I hate them. I think they're the worst. Effing conniving, cheating savages. At statecraft, athletics, you name it. I'm glad I am on Team USA." Ah, yes, Peter Strzok's damning text messages. President Trump and the Republicans who support him in Congress have decided that Peter Strzok's personal texts make him rightfully an object of outrage and apoplectic distraction on the right. Some of his personal texts, which have been made public, are in fact very critical of then presidential candidate Donald Trump. His texts are also critical and profane and snarky toward Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder and lots of other people besides, not to mention his swearing tirades against the cheating mother effing Russians. The only active political figure he expresses any positive feelings about appears to be John Kasich, okay? But Strzok was involved in the initial stages of the investigation because he was the lead counterintelligence agent at the entire FBI. When that investigation came under the purview of the special counsel, Robert Mueller, very quickly removed Strzok from the special counsel investigation staff as soon as he found out that Strzok had expressed political opinions in his personal texts. That happened a year ago, last July, long before any indictments were handed down by the special counsel's office. But Republicans have nevertheless seized on Peter Strzok as some sort of easy mark, as the way they're going to beat the Mueller investigation politically. They think they're going to use him to make the whole Russia investigation look so terrible that maybe they can get the whole thing shut down altogether or something. A couple of problems with that strategy, which we are going to see in living color over the next 24 hours, including starting tomorrow morning. One problem they've got is what his actual job was at the FBI. He ran counterintelligence in this country at the FBI. Destroying him says something about congressional Republicans' view of the value of counterintelligence at a time when there is an active concern about that for a lot of Americans, for a lot of obvious reasons. That, of course, won't stop them. But that brings us to the other big problem they've got with trying to make Peter Strzok their get-out-of-jail-free card on the Russia scandal. Turns out he's not the world's greatest doormat. His lawyer's public statements about Peter Strzok's eagerness to tell his story and clear his name are evidence of that. Strzok's lawyer telling the Washington Post, quote, Peter Strzok's political conviction that a Trump presidency would be disastrous for American national security is not based on his bias. It was based on information that was available to him. After the Office of Inspector General report was published, which referenced Strzok's personal texts, Strzok came out guns blazing at Republicans trying to downplay the importance of the Russia investigation and to still play up Hillary Clinton's emails instead. His lawyer saying, quote, not every FBI investigation is of equal importance to U.S. national security. There's simply no equivalence between an investigation of the possible mishandling of classified information, a relatively commonplace occurrence in the FBI's Washington field office, and credible evidence suggesting that the presidential campaign of a major party candidate was actively colluding with a hostile foreign power in a way that could undermine the integrity of an American presidential election. To require senior national security officials to profess fealty to this false equivalence is short-sighted and dangerous. Tomorrow, there's going to be an all-day spectacle that is going to unfold on your TV screen, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, where Republicans in the House have demanded an open-ended day of testimony from Peter Strzok. They already had him 11 hours behind closed doors. Now they want to do it on TV all day long tomorrow because they think they can make Peter Strzok some sort of national villain. I'm not sure they know exactly what they're in for with this guy, though. Given his history, given his career, given the way he has responded to the way they have come after him thus far, it is clear that Peter Strzok, whose career the Republicans have now destroyed, Peter Strzok, who was the lead national security official in this country in charge of countering Russian intelligence operations on our soil, this guy is going to have hours and hours and hours of public testimony tomorrow starting at 10 a.m. And the Republicans think that'll work out great for them. But it's clear that he has tales to tell, and he very much wants to tell them. And so this is going to be worth watching. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.